Hey folks, this week we're talking about comic books as social commentary. We've done a little bit about comic books earlier. We're going to kind of delve into that again. Um, Big thing as far as the civil rights movement is, with comic books is that the civil rights movement is filled with a lot of different personalities, and they're all, on the positive side, working for a greater sense of equality. And in some of that effort, some of these individuals don't find themselves on the same path at all. And a really great example is Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. I really like this big variety. It shows that no one person really has the only answer of what to do in light of racism and segregation. And we've addressed this before a little bit. The book also has addressed this. Much earlier, decades earlier, Booker T. Washington is a big proponent of accommodation. The African American community is just going to have to work hard and demonstrate to the white community that they can move, that the white community can move past racism, and that the African American community is just going to have to put up with it for a while. It is a very, very super boiled down version of Booker T. Washington's message, and eventually, according to Washington, the white community will eventually become more accepting, but the African American community is just going to have to allow them to get there eventually. Now, that is very, very much countered around the same time. W.E.B. Du Bois pops up a couple of decades after Washington has gotten his start. And W.E.B. Du Bois is very much outspoken. He's much more demanding of ending racism, ending segregation issues, ending discrimination issues. We're not going to be accommodationists. We need to get this stuff moving now and make these changes right now. And so it's really kind of cool. You've got different personalities, throwing different ideas out there, and everybody's kind of pushing for the same ultimate goal, but they have different methodologies in doing so. In the 1960s, we've got, and lots of other people, but it's kind of easier just to kind of settle on two or three different personalities to kind of demonstrate these methodologies. But in the 1960s, late 50s, 60s, you've got Martin Luther King Jr., who is a champion of nonviolence to try to get civil rights. King very famously promotes that idea of passive resistance. Go to demonstrations, yes, get arrested and stuff, get roughed up by the cops, but we're not going to fight back. We're just going to be arrested, And one of the sort of the tactics that King uses is that we're just going to flood the jails. That these demonstrations are going to be very large, and we'll just fill up the jails, and we'll the authorities will have to do something to address that kind of issue with some sort of a reaction. So down in one of King's big things, big marches was down in Birmingham, and it's the Children's March. King is going to have these kids march out in front of the column, and they're basically just supposed to march to the mayor's office to discuss segregation issues and discrimination issues in downtown Birmingham. Well, I forgot what his actual title is, but he's basically the chief of police in Birmingham, a guy named Bull Connor. Bull Connor is going to call out the fire department to use fire hoses to blast the children. He's also going to have the cops come out with police dogs, and they're going to let the dogs loose on the kids. And it really shows the degree of hardcore, sort of entrenched systemic discrimination and racism that's going on down here in the South, because, this goes down in 1963, I'm pretty sure, is the Children's March. A lot of American households have televisions. And so a lot of Americans are seeing on the nightly news what's going on in Birmingham. A decade earlier, we had other events going on that were and decades and decades and decades of stuff. But those were in print media, and those stories were being told in print media. But when you read about something, somebody could be, lying to you, somebody could be exaggerating, all that kind of stuff. There's also occasionally some still photographs that come out of, the South that's depicting these things. But there's something about live video when you can actually see fire hoses being used on children and police dogs being let loose on these kids. That has much more of an impact than, just still photography or, text. It really hits you a lot harder. And so, with King's Children's March, there's a lot of news outlets that are down there in Birmingham that are filming this stuff, and that stuff is going to be televised all over the country. And so, we really see, not in real time, but, pretty recorded evidence anyway of what has happened, right before our eyes. But with King's Children's March, with a lot of other King marches and stuff, he's going to focus on passive resistance. There's not you've got to not embrace that urge to fight back. You just kind of got to go with it and allow these things to happen to show what's going on. But not everybody's of that mindset. Other people in the African American community see the need for meeting violence with violence. You just can't roll over, from some people. Much, much earlier, Ida B. Wells, an African American newspaper reporter out of Memphis, she had really, really done a lot of stories on documenting lynchings throughout the American South. And she had written earlier that, quote, "The Winchester rifle deserves a place of honor in every Black home." It gives African Americans and those families the ability to defend themselves. Where we're at right now in the 1950s and 60s, a guy out of Mississippi named Robert F. Williams was higher up in the NAACP, and he was promoting arming of African Americans. Look, white people are killing and lynching people. We need to resist that. And Williams even gets kicked out of the NAACP for promoting, this kind of answering violence with violence. Also with Williams, the FBI went after him. The FBI goes after a lot of people pretty hard. Especially progressive movements. J. Edgar Hoover was just absolutely paranoid about any kind of communist sort of leanings, and he saw a lot of these sort of anti-racism groups as promoting equality. Well, equality is, communism promotes equality kind of stuff. And so Hoover, the head of the FBI, really went after a lot of civil rights groups, unfortunately. So the FBI went after Robert F. Williams pretty hard, and he fled to Cuba for a while and did a pirate radio station out of Cuba called Radio Free Dixie, and broadcast. Really, I think they only reached to like Florida or something. He doesn't have a super powerful transmitter. Eventually, he returns back to the United States, though. But our other big central character in the 1960s, though, is Malcolm Little. Later, Malcolm Little will change his name to Malcolm X. And he's operating around the same time as Martin Luther King Jr. He went to prison at 21. He had a religious conversion in prison. While he was locked up, he converted to the Nation of Islam. Now, just as an aside, Nation of Islam is inspired by, but very different from mainstream Islam. You can look into that on your own. It's a lot different, but it does have some interesting parallels and stuff like that. But X argues that African Americans, and the Nation of Islam as a whole was doing this at this time as well, African Americans should assert themselves, demand what they need, and absolutely be treated fairly. X called for African American self-sufficiency. We're going to open African American businesses. We are going to build up African American communities. Ultimately, Malcolm X even calls for a separate black nation. The idea was to take Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi and create those three states as an African American nation and secede from the United States with those. Now, here's the big thing. He's incredibly charismatic. There are higher ups in the Nation of Islam in the United States, but Malcolm X is super, super charismatic. He's very, very charming. And, so he goes, eventually he goes to Harlem and becomes the national spokesman for the nation. Along with all of that, and kind of very much getting into that separate black nation, X is preaching that maybe we should be skeptical about all this integration stuff. All the other, well, not all of them, a lot of other African American leaders during the civil rights movement are really promoting integration and getting rid of segregation issues. But maybe that's just not possible according to X. Maybe we can't live peacefully side by side. We can't just, all kind of hang out and break bread together, is what Malcolm X is thinking. And, judging by the last couple of decades, he does have a point. There's been a lot of white violence toward African Americans, a whole heck of a lot. And maybe, white folks are not capable of doing something like this. And so, X is like, maybe there's something different. Maybe we just have to think about this different. Maybe we can't, live side by side, is X's argument. So kind of cool. We've got these two big civil rights figures. Martin Luther King is promoting passive resistance. He's promoting integration. He gives his I Have a Dream speech where white children and African American children are going to be able to play together and learn together and go to school together and all this kind of stuff. It's really, really groovy. And Malcolm X is like, I'm not sure that that's possible. I don't know that we can live with these other people that are so angry and so racist and so segregationist. Maybe that's just not possible. Maybe we have to carve out our own country because these people are so rabidly violent toward the African American community. Maybe white people are too rapidly violent toward the African American community. So, kind of jumping to the side, and this is a couple of panels from the comic book, The X-Men. In the X-Men, there are a group of mutants. And if you've seen the movies, if you've seen the comic books, if you've seen any of the toys, if you've been alive for the last 20 years, you've at least heard of the X-Men. Under Professor Xavier, there's a group of mutants, Wolverine, Gambit, Cable, Cyclops, Jean Grey. I almost called her Jean Grey Jeans, or I don't know what the heck I was about to call her. But anyway, those are the X-Men. Those are the superhero side of things. In the comic books, there are some humans that are okay with mutants, but there's a really, really loud, angry segment of society that fears mutants because they are different. And some of those members of that very vocal segment of society, of human society, even will murder some of the mutants. We've even got a senator in the X-Men comics, and he's depicted in the movies as well. Senator Robert Kelly advocates for the Mutant Registration Act, and he really leads the charge for this hate against mutants. He has a lot of violent rhetoric. We need to, register these people. They're all a danger. They're a menace to society kind of stuff. And a lot of that echoes a lot of white politicians during this time. Not all white politicians, but there are some white politicians during this time that Robert Kelly is echoing. So from the Professor X and the X-Men, they're promoting defending themselves, not harming the humans, going out of your way to not harm the humans, but they are going on the hopes that eventually the humans will come to accept the mutants and they can live side by side and everything will be peaceful. And there's this big kind of coexistence kind of imagery that Professor X is promoting. And, that should remind you maybe of Martin Luther King Jr., that we're not going to meet violence with violence against the humans. That the humans are just misguided. They'll come around eventually. Also, kind of, you got some Booker T. Washington going on in there. On the other side, though, and this is a couple of panels that depict some stuff with Magneto. There are a couple of young people. One of them's definitely a child that are mutants that have been murdered, lynched. There you go. And they're hung up on the swing set at a school. And Magneto comes in and he takes these two people down from there and swears vengeance. So Magneto's backstory from the comic books: Magneto was a Jewish kid. His parents were killed in the Holocaust during his time in one of the camps. I don't remember which camp, if they ever said which camp that Magneto was taken to as a child, but his powers are discovered by one of the Nazis, and he's spared by them because they hope to use this young Jewish kid who is a mutant as a weapon. And Magneto accepts that, holy cow, humans are terrible. Look what they did during the Holocaust, and we're repeating that right now. And he says that humans and mutants just cannot live together. And Magneto goes a bit farther, because this is comic book land. Magneto is going to go a lot farther than Malcolm X. Maybe we're just going to have to murder all the humans. We can't live with them. But he also does kind of look, maybe we'll at the very, very least have to live separately and establish our own country just for mutants. And so Magneto really pushes that division between humans and mutants, that these two groups just can't live together. Humans are too violent. They are too prejudicial. They just can't accept mutants. And that really is a very, very big parallel with Malcolm X. The two writers of the X-Men, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, in the 1960s and even later on. First edition of the first issue of the X-Men comes out in September of 1963. So you do have King and Malcolm X operating around this time. There's a little bit of an argument, especially for Malcolm X, that he wasn't as widely known, and so Kirby and Lee wouldn't have known of Malcolm X to really base Magneto on him. I don't know, but a big thing is that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby never ever come out and explicitly say that they based Magneto and Professor X on Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. They never really come out and say that they do that. think I don't think that they ever really hardcore deny it. I think that Stan Lee later in life said that, yeah, there are some parallels there, but that's as far as you can get him to nail it down. The comic book community argues endlessly on this. You can look up articles that claim that, hey, this is absolutely Kirby and Lee were very much basing Professor X on these two guys. And you can find other articles that are like, nope, absolutely not. The timeline doesn't really quite work. You know, that argument that I threw out there a second ago with Malcolm X not being really, really super widely known at that time of the writing of the X-Men. I don't know. It's really difficult to gauge how, a famous person, how famous they were at, the very, very start of their career. And if a couple of comic book writers knew about them, who knows? Maybe these guys were just absolute news hounds and followed all kinds of stuff. I mean, this is very much a parallel of the civil rights movement. So to me, I'm like, why wouldn't they be following these articles and news stories about the civil rights movement and disagreements within the movement and stuff? So, who knows? But kind of cool. In the comic books, later, and this is not a panel that depicts that. This is where Magneto and Professor X are hanging out. Magneto is still promoting, let's maybe murder all the humans. I don't think he promotes that idea, but I'm just kind of exaggerating. Let's kind of go to war with the humans. He definitely promotes that a couple of times. But in the comic books, at one point, Magneto even joins the X-Men. He becomes the headmaster for Professor X's school for gifted children, which that's code word for, mutant children. Magneto joins the X-Men. He becomes the headmaster for a while, and then I don't know how long he stays in the comic books in that role, but then he eventually leaves. He claims later it was all a ruse for something. I don't remember what. And he kind of goes back to his whole, humans and mutants can't live together. What's really kind of neat, though, and the comic books don't parallel this part. I looked. I'm not really super into the X-Men because that's a lot, man. That's 60 years worth of comic books. I kind of don't have that much time to be delving into to that one title. I read some comics, but that's 60 years is a big pile of comics. I couldn't find this in the comic books, but this next parallel. But a parallel that we do have with you're not sure what the heck I'm talking about. And that's cool. You'll get it in a second. A parallel that we do have with Magneto joining the X-Men. Later in the 1960s, Malcolm X went on a Hajj. A Hajj is a pilgrimage to Mecca. All Muslims, if they are able to and have the means to do so, are supposed to go to Mecca at least once in their life. And so Malcolm X does that. He's Nation of Islam. Like I said, very different from Islam, but it's got a lot of parallels to it. There's a lot of influence from Islam onto the Nation of Islam belief system and stuff. And so Malcolm X goes on this Hajj. He goes to Mecca, and it completely changes his ideas on race relations. He gets to the Middle East and he meets Muslims of all complexions hanging out together. And they're not trying to kill each other, and there's all these different people of different complexions, and they're not beefing with each other over the color of their skin. And so he gets back to the United States. He completely rejects race separation. He also, because he Nation of Islam sometimes, and Malcolm X sometimes did this earlier. He rejects anti-Semitism. He even becomes cool with interracial marriages. Earlier, he was not cool with that, but he becomes cool with that. He also endorses gender equality. This is a huge philosophical change. Dude is like going from, okay, we can't live with white people, and we do have these very, very sort of traditional ideas of gender roles, and not having interracial marriage, and and distrust of people from other religions even. And he comes back and he's just like, nope, that was wrong. That is wrong. We need to kind of jump onto King's bandwagon, not so much of the passive resistance, I think. I don't know if he changes there or not, honestly. But he jumps back into, hey, we can definitely live together. We just got to work on it and stuff like that. But that's very different from the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam does not jive with that. And Malcolm X, to sort of symbolize how much he's changed, he even drops the name Malcolm X when he comes back. He's gone from Malcolm Little as a young man, goes to prison, goes to the Nation of Islam, becomes Malcolm X. And then after this, after his Hajj, he adopts the name Malik el-Shabazz. Again, all of this stuff is diametrically opposed to the Nation of Islam, and he sees some hostility from the nation towards himself at this point. A couple of people very big in the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad, even told Louis Farrakhan, both of these guys are in the Nation of Islam very high up at the time, hypocrites like Malcolm should have their heads cut off. Malcolm's wife gets a call at one point, and this phone call was recorded. The FBI did have Malcolm under surveillance, so this phone call is recorded. And this person on the other line, probably not the FBI, probably somebody maybe from within the Nation of Islam, said Malcolm was as good as dead. And a little bit later, his house burns down. In the Nation of Islam magazine, Louis Farrakhan later even writes, such a man as Malcolm is worthy of death. So Malik el-Shabazz is getting a lot of hostility from the Nation of Islam because he is, throwing out a very different version of a goal than they're wanting. In February of 65, I'm just going to go with Malcolm because that's what I've been calling him for the entire lecture here. Malcolm told a reporter that the Nation of Islam was trying to kill him, and he was assassinated later that month. A member of the Nation of Islam, a guy named Talmadge Hayer, you don't have to remember his name, he's not going to show up on the test, and two other members were later arrested. Hayer later confesses to taking part in the assassination of Malcolm X. And, he argues that, Malcolm was a threat. He was really charismatic. He might draw people away from the Nation of Islam. He's preaching this very different message. And Hayer was paroled in 2010. He left the Nation of Islam and converted to mainstream Islam, and says that he regrets shooting Malcolm. He doesn't deny it even now. So there's some people, if you delve into that are into the, the big conspiracy kind of Alex Jones type stuff that, oh my gosh, probably the FBI assassinated Malcolm. The FBI did have him under surveillance. They were hostile toward him, but whether they assassinated him or not, it really doesn't look like it. You've got Hayer that says, hey, I did this and went to prison for it. And he's still saying that he has, still confessing to that. So, but outside of that, though, it's really interesting that you've got this really big parallel to these two figures within the comic book world. And so my argument is that not all the time, but sometimes comics are very effective methods of social commentary. It's an art form, it's literature, and it is social commentary sometimes. Now, I'm not really going to talk about these two comic books, and one of them is required reading. The Green Lantern, Green Arrow number 76, where it looks like, well, on the cover, where Green Arrow is shooting Green Lantern's power lantern. That one, number 76, is required reading. I do need you to read that. The link is up there above. You can read it on that website. I'm also going to put this into a PDF. And so if you want to just click through it there without going to the website, you can read it through that way as well. Green Arrow and Green Lantern, Green Arrow number 85. Recommended reading. You can read it. You don't have to. It is a very, very influential issue as well. It's one of the first issues where we're discussing drug use. Remember the comics book code, it's got the seal on the cover, but the comic books code says that you're not supposed to portray drug use, but if you do, it's supposed to be absolutely horrible. And Green Lantern, Green Arrow are going to address drug use, and they are going to follow the code. They're going to, drug use is absolutely horrible, because Speedy is Green Arrow's sidekick, and Speedy is on heroin. But anyway, 76, though, is required reading. This is one of the most impactful comics ever. It addresses, maybe write this down, I don't know, I'll probably address it in the discussion prompt. It addresses systematic poverty as well as systemic racism. Systemic, not systematic. I can pronounce stuff. Again, read that. It's required reading. It'll show up in the discussion board. That issue, some stuff from that issue will also probably show up on the test. So make sure you do read that at those two different methods. Two different possible areas that you can read it. And then 85 is suggested reading. So there you go. We'll talk at you later.